right, now we're going to talk about realism. Now, when we start talking about realism, usually people start to say, oh, okay, I recognize this, because a lot of what you see in realism is what today we just think of as normal. But it's hard sometimes for people to wrap their mind around the idea that actors didn't always act this way. Realism is relatively new. It really only came about in, well, the years for this are about 1840, but that was the beginnings of it. And it really didn't become very popular until about the 1890s. So that's only, 130 years ago. That's very, very recent when you consider how long theater's been around. I say that the dates are from 1840 to 1940 only because in 1940, and we'll talk about this, something changed. Realism still became a thing, but theater kind of moved away from it a little bit, and I'll talk about why when we get there. But in the meantime, what happened is film and television came out. And film and television grabbed hold of realism, and most film and television still follows these rules of realism. And that's why most of my audience, of my students rather, they're used to realism and thinking that this is just what good acting is. So let's take a look at what is realism. Well, realism was a reaction to neoclassicism, which was still around in some places, and especially, though, a reaction to romanticism. See, the people that were making realism looked at these two things, and they considered them both to be very artificial. In other words, that they looked fake. Nobody really acts this way. Nobody says, oh, the pain! And nobody worries about making sure everything happens in the same day and stuff like this. These were fake. This isn't how real people worked. And they're right. But here's the thing that my students tend to not understand. Somebody from Romanticism or Neoclassicism would say, of course it's not real. Real is boring. You look at real life all day long. If you want to see real life, just open up your window and look at real life. No, you come to the theater to see something bigger than real life. So it wasn't that they hadn't thought to do realism before, it's that to them, being real life wasn't the point. Anyway, the realism people come in and they start saying, no. Real life is beautiful and important, and we want to portray it. And so they started trying to create theater that was more like real life was. So what does that mean? Well, it means realistic sets, costumes, and especially realistic acting. I'll talk about the acting in a second. That's got its own slide. Let's talk about the costumes and the sets. You look at the sets in a realism play, and you'll see a lot of real stuff. They won't have like a picture that has a picture of a bookcase with books on it. No, they'll have a real bookcase with real books that if you pulled them out and looked at them, they'd be real. There'll be real glasses on the tables, real posters on the walls, real food. I like to look at this one because you take a look at this particular set, which looks like it's for a diner, and you notice over here, you've got like salt on the table. Is somebody going to sit down and eat on that table? Well, I don't know this play, but probably not. But they still would have real salt. Why? Because that way, if someone accidentally kicks the table and the salt falls, it really falls, and that's real. Same thing with those posters in the background. Nobody in the audience is going to be able to see those, but in a real diner, they would be there. So they do as much as possible trying to make the set look realistic. The characters would also talk like real people. We'll talk more about what that means in a minute. But for right now, that means no poetry. Shakespeare was written entirely in poetic stuff. Not entirely, but most of it is very poetic, okay, very elevated. They said, don't do that. That's not realism. People don't talk that way. No breaking into song in the middle of what you're doing. How many of you just break into song when you're talking with your friends, right? That doesn't happen. So they would say, you don't do that in realism. You got to make it more like it's real. The characters were also more like real life people. That means you don't see as many kings or generals or people like this. They were real life people, usually modern day people. So the people in the audience could look at the people on the stage and say, that person is just like me. And they have the same kinds of problems and challenges that the audience was expected to have. See, you contrast that with Shakespeare. Think about the play Hamlet. Hamlet is about a prince whose father's a king, who dies and then he sees a ghost telling him to get revenge. There's 5 things that are not likely to happen to any of you, okay? Most of you are not princes. Your parents aren't kings. If your parents die, they don't show up as a ghost and they don't tell you to go get revenge and reconquer your kingdom. That's not real. So the realism people would say, no one in the audience is going to understand that or get into that character. They're wrong, by the way. That's a fabulous play. But in any case, they wanted to have people that had real life problems, the kind of problems that people in the audience would be expected to have. Now, realistic plays would try to get the audience to think about those problems and explore solutions. Now, the difference between realism and, so the purpose of theater was to try to make the audience think. They wanted the audience to think about this, not just to feel, but to think about these problems and try to find the solutions. Now, that sounds like the purpose is to educate, but it wasn't. And I'll tell you why. When the purpose was to educate in the Greek and the medieval times, they would have a solution. They would say, this is what you should do. This is what you should think. Usually, realistic plays don't have a solution. They offer up the problem that you see what the characters do. Frequently, they don't do the best thing and they end up in sad places. Lots of realism has sad endings. And often they don't have the right solution, and the audience is supposed to leave there thinking, well, what should they have done instead? And trying to figure out a solution for real life. Because they say when you are in this same situation, when you have an argument with your wife, when you are losing your house or whatever is going on, how should you respond that's different than how this character responded? So that was the difference between realism and something like the Greeks or the medieval time, when they were really more likely going to tell you what to think. All right, now we're going to talk about a rule from theater called the fourth wall. Now, for a lot of my students, they would just consider this to be just normal good acting. Understand a lot of that is because good acting for you is realism. You're so used to realism, you think that's the only way to do it. If you go back to like Shakespeare's day, the fourth wall wasn't a thing. It was a thing in neoclassicism, but then it wasn't a thing again in romanticism. The basic concept of the fourth wall is this. Take a look at the set. And if you take a look here, and if I can ship my annotation thing, there we are, so that I can draw on this. All right, if you look at this set, you can see here is one wall, here is a second wall, here is a third wall. Where is the fourth wall? Well, it's right here. The basic idea of it is that actors are supposed to act as if the audience was behind an invisible wall. So you can't see the audience. You can't talk to the audience. The audience isn't there. You're supposed to treat the audience as if they didn't exist. You don't look at them, you don't interact with them. There were some actors that he would even take the point of leaning against the wall that wasn't there to give this real sense that the audience, you're not there. You're just watching something happen as if it's really happening and you're not there. Today, we mostly see this term from a postmodern concept, which we'll talk about a little later, called breaking the fourth wall, in which actors would directly, or characters, I should say, will directly address the idea that they are in a movie. Deadpool, for example, does this a lot. But in realism, this was an important concept, because if you go back to Shakespeare, characters would often talk to the audience in great big long monologues, tell them what they ought to think about this. And in realism, they would say, yeah, that isn't real, because in real life, if I'm sitting here talking to you and then suddenly I turn to the wall and start talking to that, then you think I'm just crazy or something like this. So you couldn't do that. So they would say that isn't realism. So they're behind a fourth wall. Ignore the audience, pretend that they are not there. Anyway, that's the concept of the fourth wall. Now, another thing, let me get rid of those annotations there. Just clear all the drawings. There we go. Another concept was something called method acting. Now, this has to do with how the actors were in realism versus how they were beforehand. Um, a lot of the basic ideas that were the same. They were still men and women. You didn't have just men on stage anymore. You had men and women on stage. They were professionals. They got paid for it, and they had celebrity. But the difference is that they started to be trained very differently than anyone had done in the past. Because you see, in the past, learning how to act, especially in neoclassicism, but really going back even to the Greeks, learning how to act was a matter of learning the right faces, the right movements, how to pitch your voice, and things like this in order to create the illusion. Realism didn't do that. And a lot of that came because of this guy. This guy's name was Constantine Stanislavski. He was a Russian director and an actor, and especially an acting coach. Very, very important. He was the inventor of what he called the method, a new way of acting. His basic idea was that instead of pretending to be angry, the actors would instead create within themselves the thoughts, emotions, and memories of their characters. They would make it real. So instead of, if I'm playing Romeo, and Romeo is supposed to be in love with Juliet, in the old way, I would say, okay, I'm in love, therefore I should put my hands on my heart, and I should faint and swoon and stuff, and I should act like, talk all breathy, like this. They had concept of like, this is how you make it seem like you're in love. It was almost like shorthand, you know, it was a code that the audience understood that this meant that character was in love. Stanislavski's idea was ignore all of that. In real life, what does it look like to be in love? The only way to know that is to be in love. So if I'm looking at this actress, I instead won't see that actress. I'll instead see someone that I feel in love with, someone that I feel the same way. I go back into my memory and remember what it's like to first feel that excitement of love. And I live through that again. I live through that emotion again. And then my emotions, my voice, my facial expressions will just automatically create those. They would use their own memories and their own emotions. This was called emotional recall. Now, this was an entirely different way of acting. As a result, actors started to become kind of like amateur psychologists, where they were trying to figure out how the brain worked and how their minds and their emotions worked. And so a lot of acting training became kind of like therapy, where you go deep into yourself and figure out where are the emotions that I can access in order to create a believable character. They never would have done that before. And in fact, there are some people that still say this is a bad idea. You remember when I talked about in improvisation, I talked about The Shining. A lot of what caused that director to do the terrible things he did in The Shining is the idea that he said, I want to make it real. I don't want to have this actress just act like she's scared. I want her to really be scared. So a lot of people will look at this and say, yeah, this can be taken too far. And if you take it too far, it can be very, very dangerous. But the truth is, most TV and film actors today use some version of method acting. It's become very important to the study of theater, especially in television and film. And the reason why I say especially in film is that on stage, even the people in the front row are a good 10, 15 feet away from me. I can fake it and they might not catch it. In film, the camera comes straight up onto your face. They can look right into your eyes. If you're not honestly feeling this, the audience can tell. So a good director will say, all right, let's find out what makes you feel this way. What makes you feel angry or scared or hatred or whatever the emotion you're trying to do. And you would try to recreate that. Now, that means that maybe I'm looking at Juliet and I'm thinking about my first girlfriend when I was, 14, and she's looking at me and she's thinking about her dog that she loves. But that's okay, because as far as the audience can tell, both of us are looking at each other with this kind of shared emotion, and it works. Now, we're going to talk about some important writers and plays for this, and there's a number of them we could mention. I'm going to mention two. And one of them is more important than the other one, so I'm going to actually mention two plays by this guy. His name is Heinrich Ibsen. Oh, whoops, that didn't mean to come up all at once. All right, well, those are the two plays I'm going to talk about. But first thing we're going to talk about is something called A Doll's House. Heinrich Ibsen is often called the father of modern drama, the father of realism. Now, he didn't invent realism, but he did popularize it. He kind of was the bridge. Romanticism, melodrama was a big, big thing. And Ibsen liked to be able to have plays that started off feeling like they were melodrama. And then something would happen to shift and change and say, nope, this isn't just a story. This is how it would really be. And his most famous piece is called Doll's House. So Doll's House is it's not his most important piece. I would say that his most important piece was Ghost, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Doll's House is by far his most popular, and it was really the one that became popular enough that it kind of changed the idea and said, this is a new kind of theater, this is realism. Let's talk about what that was.
All right, the story of A Doll's House is mostly the story of this woman. Her name is Nora. Nora is married to this guy. His name is Torvald, and they seem disgustingly happy. I mean, like the first time you hear his voice, he's off stage, she's just coming from shopping, and he's like, "Is that my little squirrel that's scampering around out there? Yes, it is. Has my little bird bought things for Christmas? Yes, I have." And they seem just really, really disgustingly happy. And they have good reason to. They've got 3 lovely children who don't have big parts in the play, but that's okay. He has a new job where he's managing a bank. Everything is going great. Into the middle of this comes this woman, Christine. Christine is an old school friend of Nora's. They haven't seen each other in a good long time. She sees them being all cutesy-woosy, and she's like, oh my gosh. Torvald leaves, and her and Nora have this little conversation where she says, "Oh, you poor Christine, you've had such a hard life." She's like, "Well, you have no idea, because you've had such a sheltered life. You have no idea what terrible things can happen in the world out there." And she says, "Well, no, actually I do know some things. I'm not quite so sheltered as you think." And she tells Christine a story. It turns out, many years ago, when they were still young and didn't have children yet, Torvald was really, really sick. He had no idea how sick he was. The doctors came to Nora and said, he needs to go down south to Italy where it's warm, or else he's going to die. "Oh, I'll tell him that." No, he can't know. If he knows how sick he is, it will be worse. So he's like, "Okay, well, I just need to use my feminine wiles. Torvald, please, darling, can I go down to Italy? I want to go on a vacation. It'd be nice to go on vacation." No, we can't afford to do such things. We don't have the money to be so frivolous with our money." "Okay, we need to have the money." She goes to the bank, she takes out a loan. Now, she can't do that. In this time period, as a woman, she is not allowed to take out a loan without having a husband or father co-sign the loan. Her husband isn't going to co-sign it. Her father is actually sick and dying, so she forges her dad's name. But she thinks, that's okay, I'm doing this to save my husband's life. So she comes to him, look, Daddy gave us all this money. Now can we go to Italy, please, 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 please? "Oh, all right, fine. It's frivolous, though." And they go down to Italy. He gets better, and he doesn't get sick. Whew, everything turned out great. And Christine says, "And you never told him that you had done this?" "Oh, no, I don't want to tell him. Maybe when I'm really, really old and he has no good reason to love me because I'm not pretty anymore." "Oh, don't say things like that." "Okay, well, I don't think I'll really tell him. I don't want him to feel like he owes me stuff. But everything's wonderful now because I've been paying off the money secretly without him even knowing, and any day now I'll pay the last payment and we won't have to ever worry about it again." "Okay, well, that sounds great." Now, the guy that she's been paying it off to is this man named Krogstad. What a great name, huh? Great villain name. Krogstad is the guy that she's been paying the money to, that she's owed money to for all this time. And like I said, she's almost done with the payments that she owes him. But now it turns out Krogstad works at the bank that now Torvald is in charge of. And Torvald doesn't like him. And she's basically indicated that he's going to fire him soon. And so he says, "All right, you're going to use your influence with your husband to make sure that I don't lose my job. I have 2 little children that depend on me for food. I can't lose my job. You need to make sure I don't." "Well, what on earth makes you think that I would go out of my way to help you?" "Because I know what you did." He's put the the dates together and realize that she had to have forged her father's signature. So he knows that she committed a fraud. He said, but I did it to save my husband. Yeah, the law doesn't care about that. So you will have influence with your husband, or I will tell him what you did. No, you cannot tell him, because if you did that, he would do the most wonderful thing. But I can't let him do that. What is this wonderful thing she's talking about? Hold on to that, because that's important. But he says, well, you better use your influence then. So she tries to. She tries to use her influence. Oh, please, be nice to Krogstad. He seems like a nice guy, and stuff like that. And he won't hear of it. And she basically fires him anyway. On Christmas, by the way. He leaves this guy unemployed with 2 children to take care of on Christmas. Kind of a jerk move. But anyway, Krogstad comes to her and says, what happened? Why didn't you save me with that? I did what I could. It's like, well, then I'm going to go directly to him. If he won't listen to you, he will listen to me. I will blackmail him if I have to. He writes a letter to him saying all the things that he knows about his wife, about Nora committing fraud, puts it into a letter, puts it in the mailbox as he's leaving. Now, why doesn't she just pull it out of the mailbox? The mailbox is locked. Torvald is that kind of controlling. So she needs to try to keep him from getting the mail until she can get it out of the mailbox. And so she does what she can to distract him for a little while. Into the middle of this, we find out the reason why Christine has come to town, this whole town, was not really to see Nora. It was to see Krogstad. It turns out they are old friends, and now that she is, her husband dies, and so she's free. His wife died, and so he's free, and she has come to town to try to hook up with him again, to be the mother to his children. So that's a very sweet little story, and she says, but you know what? I do want you to be nice to Nora and let that thing go that she's talking about. Is that the only reason you're doing this? No, I wouldn't do that. I love you. Well, I will, though. I will tell him right now. I'll wait and I'll tell him that it wasn't true. No. Not yet. This lie needs to come out. The lie is destroying their family. You need to let the lie come out. He said, all right, then I'll write him a letter to change that I changed my mind. And they leave, and into the middle of this, now he goes to get the mail, and he says something to the effect of if only I could do something wonderful for you. And she says, all right, get the mail. He goes to get the mail. He takes the mail. He's going to go into the other room to read it. She starts getting together her coat and her suitcases. She thinks she's about to leave. He comes out in a rage. He says, Nora, what is this letter I'm reading? That you committed a fraud? What is this? Is this true? She's like, no, you can't do what I want you to. You can't do the wonderful thing. He's like, you sit down right now. You don't know what a foolish thing you did, what an idiotic thing you did. He's like yelling at her and shouting about how angry she is. I can never trust you again. You have committed a fraud. You've committed a lie. You are not the person I thought. Oh, do you have any idea what a stupid thing you did? And this whole time, her mouth is just hanging open. Because this is not what she expected he was going to do. And she says, I think I'm only right now realizing what I did. Into the middle of this, Krogstad's letter arrives. Okay, so he's got the letter. He looks at the letter and says, oh, look, Nora, I'm saved. I'm saved from all the scandal. You mean we are saved? Yes, of course, we are saved. Oh, he says that he changes his mind. He's brought about. Oh, he sent us the deed to the loan, so everything's great. He tears it up and puts it in the fire. Oh, everything is fine. Oh, my poor little bird, you must have been so scared about this. He thinks everything's going to go back to normal. Now, at this point, if this had been a piece of romantic theater, if this had been a melodrama, that would be the end of it. The crisis has been averted. Everything has turned out fine. But this is realism. And this is where Ibsen kicks the chair out from his audience. Because instead Nora says, no. And she leaves the room, and she comes back with her suitcases all packed, and she's ready to leave. She says, sit down, Torvald, we gotta talk. Oh, my dear little bird, we can't go visiting people right now. Sit down, we're talking. Okay. He sits down on one side of the table. She sits down at the other side. And she says to him, Torvald, has it never occurred to you that in all our years of marriage, this is the first time we've sat down and talked to each other like people? Usually you talk to me like I'm one of the children. I talk to you like you're some kind of a god. So, well, why on earth would I treat you differently than the children? You are my little pet I take care of. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm a human being. I'm a grown person with my own thoughts and dreams. And then she explains the wonderful things she expected to happen. She says, I thought when you got this letter, I never thought that you would agree to pay this man to do his blackmail. What she thought he was going to do is he would stand up and say, it was not my wife, it was me, it was all me, and he would take all the blame on himself. And he's like, you really think I'd do that? It would be a terrible scandal. I hate scandal. It's like, well, I didn't think you would do that. I thought you would protect me. I thought that you would sacrifice yourself for me, and of course I didn't want you to do that. But that's who I thought you were. You aren't the person I thought you were. I thought you were going to be some kind of a hero to me. And instead, you were just terrified of this guy's, like, the scandal he would give. You're not who I thought you were. It's like, well, but I still love you. It's like, yeah, but I don't know who you are now. I cannot keep living with you. It's like I'm living with a total and complete stranger. And so I'm leaving you. And so she's got off to leave. He's like, no, please come back. Is that the end? Okay. And it says, no, please come back. Isn't there anything I can do to change your mind? It's like, there's only if the most wonderful thing of all would happen. It's like, well, I will believe in it. I don't think it'll happen. Oh, please, tell me what it is. Only if our marriage would become a real marriage. And then she leaves. And the last sound you hear is a slamming door. And that's the end of the play.
Okay, so that's A Doll's House. And notice Ibsen's style, where he just kind of took something that seemed like it was a melodrama, and it was a melodrama up to one point. And then suddenly he says, wait, that's not how it would be in real life. In real life, this is a bad family. This is a bad couple because they're living a lie. And so he makes the audience kind of confront the idea that that kind of pretending to be something you're not is not a good thing. He was spit on. This is a historical fact. He was spit on at the premiere of this play because people were very offended by it. Some people believe that it was because he was daring to say that a woman would leave her husband and her children, without being like crazy or something like this. But he wouldn't say that. In fact, he said over and over again, even though people look at A Doll's House right now as being a very feminist piece, he used to say that A Doll's House is not about women's rights. It's about human rights. Because he would point out that Torvald is just as much living a half life as Nora is. Torvald deserves to have a partner that he can respect, and he doesn't do that because they live this lie. That's where the title comes from, by the way. She talks about that, like, I was my father's little doll and plaything, and then I came to your house and became your little doll and plaything, and the children became my little dolls. But I'm not a doll. I am a human being. And she said, before I am a wife and a mother, I am an independently minded human being. And she needs to live that way. Anyway, that's A Doll's House. That is probably his most well-known play. But, as I said before, it is not his most important play. That play, Ghosts. And the reason has to do with something called the independent theater movement. Ghosts was a play that led pretty much directly to the creation of the independent theater movement, and that's why I consider this play to be even more important than A Doll's House. So let's talk about Ghosts.
So the story says that Ibsen wrote the play Ghosts after Doll's House, because in Doll's House he was criticized for writing a story about a woman who leaves her husband. And so he decided, okay, I'm going to write a story about a woman that doesn't leave her husband. The main character is Helene Alving. Helene Alving is now a widow. Her husband is dead. Her husband, Mr. Alving, is gone. He's dead now. And her son Oswald has come back to her to help her to take care of their house and kind of take care of the property and stuff now that his father is dead. He's been away in college or whatever, and he seems very distracted about something, and Mrs. Alving is not sure exactly what it is. In order to help him out, though, they've also hired a maid. He's hired a maid named Regina, who it turns out Regina is the daughter of a former maid that they used to have, and Mrs. Alving seems very disturbed by this, and you're not sure exactly why. Until a man shows up named Pastor Manders. Pastor Manders is their old priest. And she talks to him about the past. And she talks to him about how, do you remember how my husband cheated on me several times? And you told me that I should stay with him. I came to you and asked, should I leave him? And you said, no, you ought to stay with him because that is the duty of a wife. I'm still not sure whether that was the right thing to do. And Pastor Manders says basically, well, I still think that it was what your role as a wife required for you to stay with your husband. She's like, yeah, I'm not sure whether that was the right thing to do at all, though. In any case, though, she's watching her son now, and her son is getting very close with this new maid, Regina, and she's getting more and more disturbed by it, and she doesn't really say why. Until eventually, near the end of the first act, Pastor Manders is noticing her disturbed. She says, what's bothering you? She says, ghosts. He says, what do you mean ghosts? He's like, no, not real ghosts. I can see the ghosts of the past. Because she can see that this, her son, and this, the daughter of their maid, and she can see in them the old maid, their maid that they used to have, and her husband, because they also had an affair. And as she's saying this to Pastor Manders realizes exactly what she's saying. This woman, Regina, that they've hired as a maid, is the daughter of that affair. So her son Oswald and this daughter and this woman Regina are starting to become kind of close together and like romantic together, and Ms. Alving is not sure exactly what to do about this, because on the one hand, if she does nothing, they could end up together and like married or whatever, and they're brother and sister, but they don't know it. So, but if she kept her mouth shut, then it won't ruin her husband's reputation, especially in the eyes of his son. So she's not sure exactly what to do, whether she ought to tell the truth or let the lie continue. And that's what mostly the play is about, is her trying to figure out what she should do and if she can just let it go, because hopefully they'll just fall apart and won't stay in love or whatever. Meanwhile, Oswald is clearly very disturbed about some other things that he won't talk about. Eventually, she decides that she can't stay silent and she needs to tell them the truth. And so she tells them both, you know, so it turns out you guys cannot be together because your mother had an affair with his father, and you are the result of that. And Regina reacts to this in what I think is probably an understandable way, but kind of not quite how you would expect. She gets very, very angry about this, and she basically says, so this is why my mother was kicked out of this house. We suffered and suffered in poverty all this time, and all this time this house could be partly mine because my father owned this. I have a right to it. And she basically says, you know what, if I can't work here, and I obviously I can't work here like this, but I'm going to get something out of this. So I want a piece of that inheritance, or I am bringing this story out to the news and will ruin you. And so she agrees to do that. And now Regina's not a bad woman, but she basically just is very desperate and very angry that she's lost everything, and now she knows why. It had nothing to do with her. It had to do with the fact that this guy that was supposed to be a really good and wonderful man was actually a terrible guy. This whole time while she's getting upset and yelling and then she leaves, Oswald has just been sitting there in this chair with this look on his face as if he's suddenly realized everything that's going on. And she's like, oh, Oswald, I'm so sorry to have given you this terrible thing. I didn't want to tell you about what a terrible man your father was and how he had cheated on me so much. I wanted to keep that good image of him in your mind. And he says, no, I am glad you told me, because now things make a lot more sense. And he starts kind of hesitantly describing for her the fact that he has a disease. A disease that usually comes from sleeping around with people. And he doesn't sleep around with people, and so he doesn't know how he's gotten this disease. And now it's very clear. This disease has come because he inherited it from his father. And now what this disease does is it makes people slowly go insane. And so what it basically says is, I need to be taken care of. I'm going to lose my mind. And now he knows it's entirely because of his father's actions before he was born. Helene Alving is basically just horrified by this, but all she can do is say she's going to try to take care of her son. And that's basically how the play ends. It ends with this woman who, because she listened to her pastor and didn't leave him, she ended up staying with this guy, having this child, and having this terrible thing happen, all because she didn't leave. And that's the story of Ghosts.
That's Ghosts. Now, very important play, saying very important things. And yet, for a lot of people, they felt like, yeah, but this is offensive. We're talking about things like incest and things like syphilis, which is the disease that he's dying of at the end, which was a sexually transmitted disease. People didn't talk about such things. And the problem was, when Ibsen wrote these plays, most theaters were national. What I mean is the government had to say, okay, we give permission for this play to happen. And the government couldn't do that for this one, because they said, yeah, there's too much bad, there's too much naughty things in here. We acknowledge this is a beautiful and important play, but too many people will be offended by it, and so they wouldn't allow it to happen. But so many artists saw and read Ghosts that they said, no, this play needs to be told, that it created an entirely new movement. What they basically did is, instead of selling tickets to their theater, they would say, all right, we are creating a private club. It's a private club, like a gentleman's club, and people are not buying tickets to see our show. They are buying subscriptions to our club. They're like membership in the club. Your membership will last one night for the purpose of the time that this play lasts. So they found a way to get around it, because the only way that they could then outlaw this play is if they outlawed every single gentleman's club in the city, which this was Paris. That wasn't going to happen. And what ended up happening is that other people saw that and said, hey, we can do the same sort of thing. And it led to the idea of independent theaters that did not have to be told by the government whether it was okay to do their show. And that's kind of where we live today. We still have some official government theaters that are sponsored by government entities and therefore have to do what governments say. For example, mine. I'm a public high school, so there's certain shows I can't put on because I have principals, and the principals have to report to mayors. The mayors answer to your parents, and so I probably couldn't do a really sexual play, even if I wanted to, because it would offend everybody. But we're the exception. Most theaters today are independent. They can do what they want. As long as people keep coming to their shows and paying them to see it, they can do whatever they want. That started with Ghosts. And that's why I say, even though Ghosts is not his most popular play, that would be A Doll's House, it is his most important play. I want to talk about one other realist writer, and his name is Anton Chekhov. Now, Chekhov, if I didn't talk about Chekhov, I would not be doing my job to tell you about realism. Chekhov was an extremely important writer, different than Ibsen. Ibsen kind of started off saying this melodramatic and then did a twist. For Chekhov, all the way through, the plays were realist. The characters talk the way real people do. In fact, a lot of times it's hard to tell exactly what's going on unless you're watching it, because the actors have to be able to explain by their voice how they feel. The characters don't say it, because in real life, characters generally don't say, I am feeling sad now, So you needed to be able to have an actor show that. Otherwise, it was really tough to see what was going on. And he wrote a lot of realism plays. We could talk about really any one of his plays. There was a lot of them, and they're all pretty good. if you can get into it. I will say one issue is that they are, he is Russian. Chekhov is Russian, and his plays were very much about what it was like to be Russian during his time period. So sometimes the translation makes it a little hard for us to get into, but they're still beautiful, beautiful plays. And the one that I want you to know about is called The Cherry Orchard. Now, in order to understand this, the first thing you need to know is something about Russian politics of the time. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the Russian politics, and then we will talk about this play, The Cherry Orchard.
Okay, quick review of Russian history during the time of Chekhov, okay? First of all, something called feudalism. Many of you are familiar with this. It was how Europe ran for hundreds of years during the Middle Ages. The basic idea was that you had lords. Lords were over a certain area of land, and they owned all of it, including some of the people living on it. Those people were called serfs. Serfs didn't own anything. They were considered part of the land. And a lord was supposed to take care of them. That's kind of part of what was going on. And they took care of them in the same way that you would take care of your fields or your grain or your animals or something like this. You didn't want them to fall apart because you wanted them to be successful. So, but they didn't have rights in the same way. Anyway, that's how Europe ran for hundreds of years. And then they stopped in the Renaissance and they changed all around. All of Europe changed, except Russia. Russia kept up with this system of lords and serfs for much longer than other people. It wasn't until the end of the 1800s that one of the leader, the Tsar, decided to just say, you know what, that's enough, no more serfs. All the serfs are now free, you own the land you live on. Which was great for the serfs. And many of the lords liked the idea too, because they felt like finally we'll get out of the Dark Ages and start joining in with the rest of Europe, which was way further advanced than them. But here is the problem. The serfs didn't know how to manage things, but they knew how to work. The lords knew how to manage things, but they had no idea how to do any work. And so what ended up happening is that after a while, the serfs started to become more powerful and richer, but they didn't know what to do with it, and the lords got very, very poor. So basically their whole society just turned upside down, and this is what eventually led to things like the Bolshevik uprising and communism and stuff like this. That happens way after Chekhov. When he wrote, this whole topsy-turvy thing had just started happening, where you had serfs being freed and lords that really didn't know what to do with themselves. Into this, we come to the story of The Cherry Orchard. Okay, first things first, these are Russian names. I'm probably going to say them wrong, alright? But the main character of The Cherry Orchard is this old lady whose name is Madame Reneskavya. I'm probably saying it wrong. In any case, she was a lady. She was a rich person, one of the people of the old families that owned a whole bunch of land. Now, she no longer owns that land. Now, all she owns is the house she lives in and a cherry orchard. That's it. All the rest of her much territory has now been given out to her serfs. So, she had a lot of money saved up because they were a very rich family, but now it's bit by bit going away because there's nothing coming in. It's just all going out. But Madame's kind of, let me just say Madame. Madame is still hopeful that everything will turn out right. And she has a lot of family and a lot of friends that are there to help her out. Many of these people live in the house with her and are there kind of on her, she's kind of paying for them to survive and stuff like this, and so they're kind of hangers-on, but they're also willing to help her as much as they can. And she also has a number of her old serfs. Now, her serfs weren't her slaves. They didn't hate her. In fact, they want her to do well. She has one particular serf that tells her some good advice. Says, you know, what you really need to do, you need to take a look at this cherry orchard you have sitting out here. It does nothing. It doesn't produce any cherries. It just produces beautiful trees. He says, these are a waste of space. What you should do is cut down this whole cherry orchard, build little apartments, then you'll have people living in there, they will pay you rent, and then you will have income. And then you'll be safe. And Madame hears him say this and says, oh, you're probably right. But I could never cut down my grandfather's cherry orchard. I can remember going for picnics in the cherry orchard when I was a girl, and there's so many memories I have tied up in that place. I couldn't do that. Surely that isn't what we ought to do. Surely my grandfather would be so upset if I had done that. No, I can't cut down that cherry orchard. We will find another way. If we hope and if we pray, God will make it possible for us to survive. And there's a lot more going on to this, and I don't want to get into the entire story, but basically, that doesn't work out so well. And bit by bit, her fortunes start failing and failing and failing until all they've got left is the amount of money she's got, and their house is going on auction. So she gives all the money they've got left to her nephew, basically, who is a well-meaning guy but not that bright, and she says, go to the auction and spend whatever we have. We need to be able to keep our house and stuff like that. Somehow it will all work out. It'll all work out if we just pray hard enough. And if this was a piece of romanticism, it would, because they're good people that have a good desire. But this is realism. So he comes back later on after she's been praying and hoping all this time, and he says, I'm sorry. I tried, and we were there, and I spent all the money, I offered all of our money, but somebody else came over and offered more, and we've lost the house. It's like, but who could have done that? This is a local thing. It was only our friends that were there. And the surf guy says, I did. I can't believe this. This home, my grandparents were not allowed to set foot in this home because they were serfs, and now I own it. This is going to be my house. This is wonderful. And he is in a great mood. Madame bursts into tears and starts crying. And he looks at her and says, you have no excuse to cry. I told you exactly how to protect yourself, but you wouldn't listen to me. You know the first thing I'm going to do? When this sale is final, I'm going to cut down every tree in that stupid orchard, because it is a useless waste of space. If you'd listened to me, you would be fine. But no, you thought you were more smart than me because I'm a serf, because I used to be a serf. Well, you've got what's coming to you. And she can't even respond. All she can do is burst into tears and cry. Then we come to the very last scene of the play. In the very last scene of the play, her and all of her family members and stuff, they are leaving the house, and they're moving into another smaller place along with other family that live out in St. Petersburg, which is a bigger city and stuff. And it's a really sad scene. Throughout the whole thing, all you keep hearing is the sound of axes chopping down trees. And every time she glances in that direction, she just shudders and turns away. But at the end of it, she's talking with her family member, and she says basically, well, this is terrible and horrible, of course, but I suppose it is meant to be. Maybe we are meant to move to St. Petersburg. Maybe we're meant to move there, and maybe there's all the will of God. And everything will turn out fine. If we just hope and we keep trying, everything will turn out fine. She's learned nothing. She still believes that if she just hopes enough, if she just has good enough will, that everything will turn out fine just by hoping for it. She has learned nothing. Now, the reason why I decided to use this play, as opposed to any of the other plays that Chekhov did, is that this is a very realism lesson. Chekhov is saying that no matter how much you hope for things to be better, you need to face reality. Because if you don't face reality, it will squash you. That's the message. And that is very much a message of realism. It comes up in lots of different realism plays. The idea that if you cannot face reality, reality will squish you like a bug. Okay, so in the discussion down below, this is what I want you to do. So far in theater history, we've talked about a bunch of different plays, okay? We talked about The Country Wife and the Rover from the Restoration period. We also talked about the Misanthrope from Neoclassicism. We talked about Faust from Romanticism. And now we've talked about 3 different plays from Realism. So I want you to think about all those different plays. Tell me which of those plays seems the most interesting to you. Which one seems like a play you would like to see, you'd like to read about, you'd like to maybe act in? Tell me one of those plays that strikes you as interesting and why that one. Put that answer in the discussion down below, and I will see you guys later.